But the real coup de grace came in 2008 when Bush, in his last year of office, insisted that NATO commit to enlarge to Ukraine and to Georgia. And then Putin said, you must be kidding. This is our immediate backyard. This is more than 1,200 kilometers of border, and you're talking about putting a military alliance up against our border. This is where our naval fleet is in the Black Sea, and you're talking about surrounding us with Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia in the Black Sea, and our port, our naval port, Sevastopol in Crimea. So he said, no. And he said to George W. Bush Jr. in 2008, you expand NATO to Ukraine, Russia will take back Crimea. He already told him, you're crossing the line on this. And then a president was elected in Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, who was seeing, my God, our country's in between these two superpowers. So Yanukovych said, we go for neutrality. We don't want to be members of NATO. We don't want to be a war zone. So the Ukrainian parliament adopted neutrality, and it was a little quiet. And in late 2013 and early 2014, a mass uprising took place called the Maidan Revolution, and the United States played a role in stoking it. It was partly popular, partly U.S. driven. We can't tell exactly the dynamics, but definitely the U.S. meddled, as it does. Definitely there was some natural politics to it, but the upshot of it was that Yanukovych was overthrown, and the new government that came in was an all NATO, all Europe, we're going for the West, and that's when Putin took back Crimea and when the war started. It's very analogous that when Fidel Castro in 1960, after the Cuban Revolution, turned to the Soviet Union, it did not take long, by the way, for Eisenhower first to say, okay, now we invade Cuba, because immediately the CIA put together a plan to invade Cuba, because Cuba with a military alliance with the Soviet Union, hell no. So the United States, of course, by the way, if Mexico announced one day, we really like China and we're entering a military alliance with China, and Washington says Ukraine can make whatever choice it wants, so we want to make whatever choice we want, it would probably be a war in 20 minutes. The United States would never tolerate it, the U.S. government, that is. But we can't understand the red lines of other countries because the U.S. is a very arrogant country. You know, when you're so powerful, you think the rules apply only to the others, not to you or whatever, or that you don't have to, what you feel doesn't matter for anyone else. And so there's a kind of arrogance built into this, which is that what the U.S. would never tolerate, it expects other countries to accede to. And Putin said, no, you know, this is my backyard, Russia's backyard. We don't accept NATO here. And more to the point, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Soviet Union, after the U.S. invasion of Cuba, responded by Khrushchev putting offensive nuclear weapons into Cuba, which was a very reckless thing. But Khrushchev wanted to teach the Americans a lesson. He wanted to say, you have missiles pointed at us in Turkey, we will have missiles pointed at you in Cuba. You invade Cuba, we'll defend Cuba. So Khrushchev was trying to do politics in this way. but in a very clumsy way. As soon as it was discovered that those missiles were there in mid-October 1962, everybody in the U.S. leadership said, well, we've got to go to war. Kennedy organized an executive committee to consider the options. And everybody said, okay, well, the only decision is it war on Thursday or war on Saturday or war on Monday? How do we get ready for war? But Kennedy kept saying to himself, why did Khrushchev do this? Why did Khrushchev do this? What's in his mind? I need to think of this from his point of view. And this was really brilliant, extremely important. It ended up saving the world. Kennedy had one advisor at the beginning, Adlai Stevenson, who was the U.S. ambassador to the UN, who said to Kennedy, you have to end this diplomatically. Kennedy was shocked because every other advisor had said, you have to end this militarily. And Kennedy was also very politically conscious, as a political animal. He said, if I don't respond to this in a tough way, I'm going to be impeached. I'm certainly going to pay a heavy political price. So on the one hand, he was told, go in and bomb. He knew something wasn't right about that. He was quite afraid politically for his own circumstances if he looked too soft on this. And that's why crises like these are so unbelievably dangerous. And incidentally, the CIA had correctly spotted these missile sites in Cuba with the air surveillance, the so-called U-2 spy planes, but they were wrong on so many details. They said the missiles weren't yet in operation, but many were. They said there were about 5,000 Soviet troops, but it was closer to 40,000. So many things that they thought were true were false. And the premise of how the U.S. would militarily engage was based on lots of false premises, which is also par for the course. And the reason I mention it is we've got a war going on that's a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia right now in Ukraine. It's extraordinarily dangerous. We shouldn't think, well, they're keeping it under control. Yeah, it's terrible for the Ukrainians, but nothing too bad can happen. As long as this war goes on, something absolutely terrible can happen. Absolutely terrible. Even a field commander, often has authority to use a tactical nuclear weapon or something, or an accident happens, or somebody misreads a radar signal, or God knows what kind of thing can happen. Miscalculation is par for the course in a crisis like this, which is why I'm insisting every day we need to negotiate this. We need to understand that NATO enlargement crossed a red line very dangerously. Putin told us that repeatedly for a dozen years. We refused to listen out of arrogance. Now we have a war going on. Now we need to find a diplomatic way out, and quickly, before terrible accidents happen.
Russia didn't capture the Crimea. You can't capture that which is yours. I mean, the vast majority of the people in Crimea view themselves as Russians. Russia liberated Crimea. Let's just get the terminology correct here. To capture it means that you're taking away from people that don't want it. They're going to resist you. The vast majority of the people there were like, thank you. You're liberating us. So we have to get the terminology correct. And why did they feel they had to be liberated? Because of the events in the Maidan, the rise of this right-wing ultranationalism, neo-Nazi derived government that declared war on ethnic Russians, literally declared war on ethnic Russians. In April, they passed a resolution basically labeling all ethnic Russians as terrorists, authorizing the Ukrainian military to engage in a counterterrorism operation against ethnic Russians. So now Russia liberated the Russians from the Ukrainian tyranny. That's the reality. But they can't say that because in the end, look, the truth will out. I just firmly believe that. Look at all the lies that were told about weapons of mass destruction. All the lies that continue to be told about weapons of mass destruction. But how many people in the world today believe that? How many people go, oh, yeah, because America says there are weapons of mass destruction. I think the vast majority of people in the world said, you lied. You went to war on a lie. The truth will out. Right now, we have a government, Ukraine, that needs to maintain the fiction that what happened in the Maidan in Kiev wasn't a coup, but a righteous revolution against the tyranny of Viktor Yanukovych, and they freed themselves of the Russian yoke. And these are not right-wing neo-Nazis, these are legitimate Ukrainian patriots. And the Russians were evil because Putin, remember, Putin's that KGB guy, and he came in and he got the Russians to rise up against us, and we had no choice but to do this, and it's all Putin's fault. That's all a lie. Now, someday in the not too distant future, the Ukrainian government is going to be destroyed, defeated, eliminated. And at that time, the world is going to come into possession of documentary evidence and confessions, because there's going to be trials. And the truth of what happened in 2014 will emerge, just like the truth of weapons of mass destruction emerged. Now, you're not going to get the United States to admit that it did wrong, because, of course, we are anointed by God. We can do no wrong. Therefore, we should admit nothing. But the rest of the world, even those who are supporting Ukraine today, are going to be confronted with an overwhelming body of fact-based data that proves that this was one of the most evil governments ever seen on the planet since Adolf Hitler's time. What they're doing to their own people, the lawlessness, creating incidents like Bucha and you have Ukrainian officials openly bragging about killing thousands of people. You're going to have to do a census to find out how many people we killed, because we just kill them. We don't care. We bring them in, we shoot them, we dump their body. This is all of Ukraine. This is how the Ukrainian officials act. This is how they operate. They're at war with their own people, and the Americans tolerate this. The truth of this will come out. Look, Biden has been central to the policy of regime change that the United States has embarked on regarding Vladimir Putin, to remove Putin from power. And one of the key aspects of this regime change policy is to create the conditions inside Russia, especially in Moscow, for a Maidan-type insurrection. That's Biden's goal and objective. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. And Obama doesn't get a clean bill of health, because Obama's the one that approved the Russian reset, which was nothing more than a farce. It was regime change, the regime change wolf wrapped in the Russian reset sheep's clothing. We were trying to be something, but we were really just trying to keep Vladimir Putin out of office and make Dmitry Medvedev the modern day incarnation of Boris Yeltsin. Joe Biden is a lying sack of horse manure. Joe Biden is not the smartest man in the room. He is literally the dumbest man in the room. So people have to be careful when they impart, deep thought into Biden's action. Joe Biden allowed a circumstance to exist while he was the policy czar that created the perception that his son was using the Biden name to make millions of dollars in Ukraine, and that Joe Biden was somehow benefiting from this. And once you have that kind of corruption embedded in the policy, you can't trust anything that ever happened after that, because you have to come away with the understanding that everything that happened in Ukraine was designed to create conditions that made Joe Biden or his son or both even wealthier. This whole Burisma thing just stinks. It's horrible. We now have some concern about, I forget, was it FTX, this cryptocurrency scam turns out to be nothing more than a giant money laundering scheme. To send money there, then that money gets sent back as donations and the political parties. This is corruption of a scale. Now, we expect it from Ukraine, but it's infected the United States as well. And Joe Biden is the man who's been most infected. You got to see him for what he is. This is not a man who cares about America. This is a man who cares only about Joe Biden. That's it. This is all about the benefit of Joe Biden. And it's disgusting, disgusting. I'm not saying that Donald Trump was any better, but for Donald Trump, he was a narcissist just like Biden is. But because he wasn't, Donald Trump made his money exploiting American tax loopholes, exploiting business development, property development, etc. He didn't make his money putting national security at risk by, subordinating American security policy to a system of corruption designed to enrich himself and enrich his son. You can say whatever you want about Donald Trump. Most of it's probably true, but he didn't do